We are going to have some fun here as the Democrats are losing their mind over the January 6th anniversary. They're actually going to have, and I'm not even making this up, a candlelight vigil on the steps of the United States Capitol tonight. They've already spoken Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris in the early morning to try and set the agenda of this day. More importantly, over 330,000 kids in Chicago still not in school. Kids all over the country, Atlanta area kids. So many different kids not in school, not being paid attention to. COVID setting all-time headlines. I saw you, Buck, tweet, and I thought this was great, that Biden wore a mask to walk up to deliver his speech, to take the virus seriously, and then took off his mask to begin his speech. I just want to thank him for making sure that no one got COVID in that dastardly 4 seconds that he spent walking up to the lectern.
That they're that open about how this is just theatrics and we're supposed to take all of their proclamations seriously. It's stunning how stupid they think everyone is willing to be. A lot of people are, unfortunately, but not all of us.
I actually think this is not landing in a very significant fashion for much of America, this anniversary idea, because, one, most people are aware that there's no real existential threat to American democracy. Two, kids are going back to school or parents are having to cover for kids not going back to school at the end of the winter holiday. By the way, 6 inches of snow pummeling the city of Nashville right now, Buck. It's like I-95 in Virginia on steroids. I was just telling you off the air. People in the South cannot drive when there's snow. People are panicked about that. And then there's still a ton of people who are legitimately terrified of COVID thanks to all the fear-mongering from Democrats for the past 2 years. And we continue every single day to set new highs for COVID infections. But we're not going to spend all day talking about the Democrats memorializing January 6th, but I did want to play a couple of cuts for you. First of all, the number 2 here, Kamala Harris compared January 6th to Pearl Harbor and 9/11. I swear this is real. Listen.
Certain dates echo throughout history, including dates that instantly remind all who have lived through them where they were and what they were doing when our democracy came under assault. Dates that occupy not only a place on our calendars, but a place in our collective memory. December 7th, 1941, September 11th, 2001, and January 6th, 2021.
I mean, come on. I wish I could use expletives on this show right now. Now, Kamala is saying democracy's under assault because people didn't believe that Joe Biden was the democratically elected president of the United States. Well, guess what happened in 2016 when Trump got elected? Much of the Democratic Party lost their mind and spent 5 years arguing the only reason he was president was because of Russia, including Kamala Harris, who went on the radio and said she did not believe that Donald Trump was the legitimate president of the United States.
Elections matter. When you win an election, you get to set the rules.
How can you win with Russian interference, though?
That's a real
what I'm
thing.
scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right. So, again, as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I will tell you that we should believe exactly what the intelligence community has told us, which is Russia did interfere in the election of the President of the United States in 2016.
He says Donald Trump's not the legitimate president.
Yes.
And then Kamala says, you are absolutely right.
Yes.
You could hear this. And let's just be very clear about what they did do for 4 years. They created a fabrication, okay? They can talk about Russian Facebook bots until, all day long.
By the way, it was almost no money that Russia
which is
spent.
absurd. No one who
Yes.
understands how the internet works thinks that meant anything significant.
Yes.
But they did create essentially a coup narrative from within the government itself of we need to get rid of this president. he's a Russian spy, he's a Russian asset. Then the 25th Amendment got talked about. So they were trying to use, through lies and through abuse, the mechanisms of our government itself to get rid of a duly elected president. And now they want to lecture us about the sanctity of democracy. Now they want to, 95% of the Democrat Party basically went along with the Russia collusion lie. A few hundred people actually got violent and out of line and broke the law on January 6th. Every mainstream conservative commentator you can think of, everyone you can find. I mean, I actually was tweeting expletives about how they need to knock that you-know-what off as soon as I was like, this is a terrible idea. What the heck?
Because you knew what was going to happen, that the Democrats were going to use it forever as evidence of how Republicans don't believe in democracy.
It was a blunder because the Democrat Party had spent months, and this is another thing we need to focus on, had spent months being the riot party, being pro-riot, using riots to terrify their political opponents. Remember this, everybody, the 2020 election happened under duress, and that's just not my analysis. There were photos all over the media, and it was meant to say, they were amplifying the message of businesses boarding up and getting ready for anarchy in the streets if Trump won, because Biden voters were going to riot. So there was essentially an implied threat all across the country of, you guys better not actually vote for Donald Trump or else there's going to be anarchy. It's going to be, Mad Max in the streets. And that's not just in rhetorical terms. People believed that. They took action based upon that.
Yes.
So the election was held under duress. They had riots for months. What makes me so angry is that a few hundred people in one fell swoop, unfortunately, now have at least muddied the waters of the obvious narrative, which is that the Democrats were the riot party. They were the only ones, right?
Yes.
The Tea Party was countless gatherings of patriots being law-abiding, friendly, decent, and amazingly so. I mean, they were all gathering together afterwards to clean up the litter that was left. You make sure there were no placards left behind or anything. That was the Tea Party's legacy. And, they're going to exaggerate this as they are today, and they're trying to do everything in their power to leverage this as a club to bludgeon everybody into silence about the Biden regime's failures and to try to taint everyone who ever voted for Donald Trump as an insurrectionist. I mean,
that's right.
It's all lies, but we have to understand what the purpose of this is and how they're going to try to use it against the opposition to Biden going forward, because, Clay, you don't buy it, I don't buy it. Obviously, the people listening to this overwhelmingly know what's going on here. How close was the last election? How many people do they have to convince the re-election of Donald Trump would lead to more political violence? Not that many. So with all the crying and the gnashing of teeth on CNN, we can view it as silly histrionics, which it is, but it is to a purpose. These people, you think of the commies as people that are ruthless, and you'll understand them much better all the time.
Well, I think they're panicked, Buck. And they're panicked because they got a once-in-100 years pandemic, which allowed them to change the mail-in voting rules, the absentee ballot rules. It allowed all sorts of chaos to ensue. They got Donald Trump as their president, right, who they could run against, which really is the fevered dream of the left wing of the Democratic Party. It's why they so desperately cling to him. They need an old white guy who is not going to apologize for being an old white guy, as opposed to Joe Biden, who's going to constantly be supplicating all of the absurd left-wing elements of his party. And they could run against Donald Trump as the fevered dream of the perfect distillation of what they were terrified America was, right? And they won, and I'm putting one in quotation marks because it's still a big mess. They won by 40,000 votes under their own tally of the Electoral College and the overall votes. And people, I don't think, focus enough on this. We're talking about roughly 10,000 votes in Georgia, roughly 20,000 votes in Wisconsin, and around 10,000 votes in Arizona. If 20,000 people had changed their mind in Arizona, in Wisconsin, and in Georgia, that's a tiny pinprick of the overall number of people who voted in the election. Donald Trump would be your president right now. That's all it took. So they put everything they could, the big tech collusion, Every major corporation in America getting in line behind the progressive agenda. Not allowing many people to even share a story about Hunter Biden and Joe Biden being the big man and taking money from China and all the Ukraine connections and all the things that they claim the Trump family was behind for years. Turns out the Bidens were actually doing. They blocked all of that. They censored all that discussion. We had a fundamentally unfair political media, and they still barely dragged Joe Biden across the finish line by 40,000 votes.
What do they really want us to do also? You know, there are a couple of things here that just don't add up. One is, I mean, to call this an insurrection is idiotic.
Yes.
Because
you laid it out. No one has
person,
actually been charged with any of these crimes.
With insurrection or with terrorism. But beyond that, it's not even just a legal matter. You can think this through. What was the plan here supposed to be, right? When
Yes.
someone's engaged in, let's say, a terror act, and it is thwarted in advance of. I used to do this professionally at the CIA and then for the Intel Division, the NYPD. You might stop someone before they accomplish their aim, but you have to explain if you're going to charge them with a terror crime, well, what was the plot, right? What was the crime? And here what we have is the allegation of the overthrow of the United States government in progress. Let's be very honest about this. When no serious person could think that that was going to happen, could have happened, or even really the aims of the individuals involved, except for a handful, perhaps, who honestly I think are of not of sound mind, and I think that's been lost in a lot of this too. I think there were some people that were emotionally fragile who got caught up in this, and that doesn't excuse them from a legal perspective, but it does go to the, if I think I'm going to, as a sole individual, rule the city of New York and overthrow the local government here, that's crazy, and maybe I'm a public risk in some sense, but I'm not going to be able to accomplish that, right? I mean, it's not a serious thing that I'm going to rule New York City and overthrow the 35,000 strong NYPD, et cetera. So it's not a serious thing to call it an insurrection, but then beyond that, okay, well, what are we supposed to do about this now? I mean, we're having, as you said, the candlelight vigil, and you have all these people weepy-eyed on CNN and MSNBC today for their audiences about how, they stood tall and they prevented the overthrow of our government. Well, they're already locking these people up, treating them worse than Al-Qaeda plotters in some cases. I mean, they're actually getting worse treatment in some of these D.C. prisons than they would have if they had been sent to Gitmo. And you say, okay, so they're being prosecuted. What do the Republicans aren't saying that this was a good thing or we support this or whatever. So what are we supposed to do about it, Clay? It's just a club to bludgeon everybody into submission for the idiotic Biden regime to continue failing.
Yeah, and make no mistake here as we go to break. Think about what Kamala Harris said when she compared 9/11 and Pearl Harbor to January 6th. She's equating American citizens who were upset about the election with kamikaze pilots in Japan who were trying to destroy our fleet in the Pacific. And she's equating, a bunch of grandmas and grandpas and moms and dads who went in with selfie sticks and were taking pictures of themselves in the Capitol. At worst, were trespassing with people who intentionally flew airplanes into buildings on 9/11.
Well, 2,400 people died Pearl Harbor. 2,403, I believe, of ours.
Yeah, over 3,000 died in 9/11. And in this situation, what we're talking about right now, the only person who died was Ashley Babbitt, who was shot by a police officer. That's it.
I've said it many times, and it's no more true or real than we think about the events of January 6th. We are in a battle for the soul of America, a battle that by the grace of God and the goodness and greatness of this nation, we will win.
Welcome back to the Clay and Buck Show. I promise we're not going to subject you to more bombast and absurdity from Joe Biden, Kamala, and others today that is absolutely necessary to because here's the thing. Yes, on the one hand, I don't like that we will spend time even having to get into this because all the threat to our democracy and all these things. These are people who had a special counsel against a president to get him thrown out of office because they had convinced themselves that Putin was running the White House. I mean, they're out of their minds. But I also think that part of what we have to do here is to deal with the lies and to fight back. I don't want to cede the battlefield of ideas to the other side and let their megaphones go without response. And so that's why we're gonna make sure that we balance it out. There's a lot of real things that are happening to Americans today. I know that it's the hollow day of reverence for January 6th is what the Democrats are all going to be focused on, and it's just we knew they were going to do this. And if nothing else, I mean, one of the immediate frustrations in the days after this a year ago was, oh God, now we're going to have Democrats for the next 20 years bringing this up as though we were all there, we were all part of the insurrection. But Clay, I think it's important to put it in an actual reasonable context, and also to not allow this to be said that or to go without response, because the Democrats were rioting for months and won't even talk about it now. They were terrifying communities across the country and had nothing to say about it other than they thought it was just fine in the run up to an election year, no less.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so infuriating is, I mean, Kamala Harris comparing January 6th to 9/11 in Pearl Harbor may be the dumbest historical analogy that any president or vice president has ever made that I have ever heard. And yet it's going to be treated solemnly as if that is a legitimate comparison to draw. And I think reasonable and intelligent people have to fire back against idiocy like this and let it be known, even though it is in some way setting the agenda and allowing this to be a topic of the day, it just makes absolutely zero sense at all to even contemplate that argument.